science, a tiny bit of middle school teacher, and have been working across the educational system for 36 years now, sort of like that. I think I'll just go around to the panelists and then to Ingrid. So just in the order of who's on my screen. Katie, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Katie Whitaker. I am an earth science teacher. I also am a meteorologist and teach meteorology in the Hudson Valley. I'm in Red Hook, which is right across the river from Kingston.
And Sean? Oh, and Sean is muted. Still muted.
There we go. Took a minute. Hi, my name is Sean Ellison. I teach earth science, and I'm adding physics and chemistry to my repertoire this year for the first time. Formerly taught 18 years at Norfolk, now teaching at Parrish Hopkinton, both of which are in the St. Lawrence Valley.
Okay.
And if you're wondering why I'm in the car, I was supposed to be at some place already, and I didn't get there in time, so that's why I'm speaking to you from my vehicle.
Yes, and we do have one more panelist who I think everybody was on when I said she is running to another building to get away from the construction sounds in her building. Mark, you want to introduce yourself? And we'll introduce everybody since it's such a small group too. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, hi everybody. Welcome. My name is Mark Johnson, and I am a recently retired biology teacher of 30 years from Ithaca City School District. I've taught mostly biology, living environment biology, but also several environmental science courses and marine biology over the years. So, welcome.
Thank you. And Ingrid?
Hi, I'm Ingrid Zabel. I'm the Climate Change Education Manager at PRI, Cognitive Grounds. So I work on climate change education in all forms, like exhibits and programs for kids and programs for the general public at the Nature Center and the Museum of the Earth, Hugo Nature Center, I should say, in Ithaca, New York, and resources for teachers.
All righty, and as I've said, but people have been popping in and out a little bit. We do have more folks coming, including one more panelist. But since we are such a small group, I'll ask the guests to introduce themselves as well. So, Anna, if you want to say hi, unmute yourself and say howdy.
Hi, my name's Anna Triller. I'm AP Bio teacher at John Jay High School in Cross River, New York. And I've been teaching for 35 years. I was excited to see this, just to hear what other people's perspectives are on things and hopefully get some ideas as we move forward.
Great, welcome.
Thanks.
And hopefully I can pronounce this right. Fioriana, could you, do you want to introduce yourself? And you're muted, but we can see you. Well, you're still muted.
Thanks. I was just getting set up.
Yeah.
My name is Floriana Blanton. I work for the Cornell High Energy Synchrotron Source in the outreach program. I was formerly with the Cornell Institute for Biology teacher. And when we were expecting a burst.
Yeah.
But I'll be right back.
Okay. And Mary, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Mary Bowles. There's a lot of construction going on here too. I teach living environment for 17 years and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Where are you?
Oh, and Kenmore West High School.
Yeah. Melissa is the one who's running to another building to get away from construction sounds. So the other panelist is in the same district. Okay, so the agenda, I'm going to screen share the agenda so you can see what we're up to. It's very informal session, as you know, again, especially since we're so small. So we're just going to do some introductions, which we've just done. And now we'll go around and hear a few minutes from each panelist on lessons learned. And then we'll open it up for questions. I'll have a few, but it'll probably be just pretty much a free exchange of ideas. before folks were on, Mark sort of volunteered Katie to go first. Is Katie amenable to that?
Cleverly done, Don.
Very nice. Yeah, thank you. Sure. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go first. So again, I'm Katie Whitaker. I teach earth science. This will be my 15th year of teaching. And, I was putting my thoughts together, and it was sort of wild to go back in time to like March of 2020, when this all sort of hit the fan, I guess. I remember the before times with we were burned out. We were tired. There were teachers and staff in the faculty room and in the copy room saying, I wish I'd get COVID so I could get 2 weeks off, not understanding the scope or the intensity of what COVID-19 really was as a disease. We really didn't know much about it. And then on March 13th, we got the directive that we were going out for, at that time, it was only supposed to be 2 weeks. I think it was 7 months before I went back into my classroom full time. And it presented a lot of challenges in a lot of different ways. I remember the start of that time being so incredibly disorganized. Nobody knew exactly what we were supposed to be doing or how we were supposed to be doing it. We didn't know the expectations on us. We didn't know the expectations of our students. We were having a hard time figuring out how to get materials to students, whether it's laptops, books, review books, whatever. As my former principal would say, we were flying the plane while we were building it, which is a really, really unsettling feeling because, especially as teachers, we try to plan for everything. And even though every day is different, which is one of the great things about the job, you don't know what you're walking into every day. We try to plan for everything. And I think with the pandemic and the shift to remote teaching, none of us could have prepared for that in any kind of way. And then there were challenges with new technology, learning Zoom, right? I didn't know what Zoom platform was before the pandemic. Now it's commonly used and it's continued to be used as a very common tool. Teams, Google Classroom, Gizmos, all those kinds of new technology that all of a sudden we had to integrate in order to reach our students on the other side of the screen. That was a lot. It was overwhelming for a lot of us. Then we also had student issues. And as I was reviewing what people were putting when they're signing up for this, as far as some of their challenges and concerns and thoughts, we'd have the students sign on and then take off. Everything would go blank. They'd sign on for attendance, but you never hear from them for the rest of the session. I know I had a student that, would sign on, they would disappear. And then I brought it up to the parent and they're like, oh yeah, his dad's home. And I guess he's playing video games, but we don't know how to stop him from doing that. So that's a challenge, right? We had, how do we get to these students, and how do we get them to participate? And some of those behaviors have continued post-pandemic. I think that's been concerning to a lot of us, is getting them re-engaged after that time of being disengaged, I think is a real challenge. Poor attendance, that's something that we're having a hard time in our district rebounding back from. Students being out, whether they're sick with COVID or just anxiety or just lack of accountability on that end, attendance has been a lot lower. With Zoom and being remote, you have to learn how to effectively monitor learning and finding engaging activities. How do you engage somebody through a computer screen when we're used to being so in person and hands-on? And all of this, we had to deal with all of that while also dealing with the realities of being in a pandemic, illnesses, uncertainties, lots of changes in our own personal lives. I think we really need to acknowledge how much we persevered during that time period and give ourselves credit, because there was a lot to adapt to. So some of the lessons I think that were learned when I was reflecting on what to speak about today, I know in the last couple of years, I've been able to reach students remotely much more effectively. So I've had a couple of students go out on long-term, either medical or going to private schools where we still had to provide work, and I could provide work to them much more effectively because I had all these new tools in my skill set that I was comfortable using. So I was able to teach the curriculum a little bit better to those students that weren't necessarily in my classroom. Flexibility, I think, is huge. We've always been flexible people as teachers. It's part of the job, but being even more flexible with my planning and being more flexible with my students and my expectations, where I still have firm expectations, but being a little bit more adaptable and flexible as far as when I push and when I pull, just sort of feeling it a little bit differently. The fact that we're able to pivot, I remember driving into school one day, school starts for us at 7:40, 7:30, we're going to remote today, pivot, right? And having to do that so quickly I think really made it so that I realized how strong of a teacher I really am. Like, to be able to pivot like that is quite incredible. And that's something that we all had to do, whether we liked it or not. And our students have also mastered a lot of new skills that makes it a lot easier for us to reach them. So obviously I'm going to probably go over my time here, and I don't want to go on too much further. But one of the things that I did this year that I was really proud of, and I think was a really effective use of these new skill sets, was I did a SALT study with my students. I am a member of the Conservation Advisory Council for my local town, and we had a member of the community come in and express concerns about the amount of road salt that was being spread on the roads here in our town. They don't mix it with anything, they don't do brines. And he was saying he lives in a cul-de-sac, that the trucks would come in and they would stop for a minute and they dump these huge piles of salt, which would wash into the streams and like kill the trees and things like that. Nobody on the CAC wanted to touch it. It was too big of a project. People were overwhelmed. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna bring this to my students. I'm gonna have them figure it out. And it was great. It's an authentic task. Got the students really engaged. You know, when we speak about how do we get our students re-engaged in our classroom, this is something that we're actually actively going to take to town boards and to other conservation advisory councils. And it doesn't have to be on that scope, but anytime you can find a task that's authentic, that's real life, that's a true problem, if you can invest somebody in something, they're going to be motivated. Whether it's us as teachers or our students, if you can find a way to invest them, they'll be motivated. So with this project, I did very little actually to set it up. And I think the pandemic really taught me to let go of control a little bit, because I didn't have much control during the pandemic. And so in this project, I did some backward design. I knew my end goal. I had some ideas on how to get there, but I really left it up to the students to design the project. And that shifted the focus from me to them. That gave them more investment into the project. They came up with the rubrics, and I'll tell you, they are way more critical graders than I am. The things that they were listing out were spectacular and way beyond my normal level of expectation. They were much stricter with their grading than I was, which I was kind of surprised to see, but it was really great. I also found that I would give rubrics for a group grade, but I also did individual accountability, where they had rubrics for their specific role in the group. So what I do is I follow a raft project, role, audience, format, topic. And in that setting, they have some choice in what they do. And so they sign up for their role. I have them sign a contract to say, you are responsible for these things in that role. If they don't do it, they don't get the points, and it doesn't affect anyone else in the group. And so for those students that are just sort of used to coasting or riding along with somebody else, they're not going to have that benefit if you hold them accountable as individuals. Yes, what they produce as a group counts, but if a student just doesn't do their part, it only impacts them. And I found that really motivates kids, because they can't just wait for someone else to do their role. There's no reason for anyone else to do their role. So it makes it important for them to do. We're planners, we're used to control, but finding places to strategically let go of that control and let our students guide the learning, it takes some of the pressure and stress off of us, and it also gets our students more involved.
Great, thanks. Unless, well, let's have Melissa introduce herself, since she has gotten hopefully to a quiet place now.
Hi, everybody. I hope it's quiet. It just got really loud as soon as you said that. So I'm Melissa Depp, and I teach in the Kenton schools in Buffalo, or like just outside of Buffalo, at Hoover Middle School, 7th grade science. I'm currently at East High School, getting ready for a science meeting.
And my colleague Rob is here as well, so let's have Rob say hi.
Hey folks, yeah, sorry I arrived late, busy day, but appreciate everything people are contributing. And I am Don's colleague and Ingrid's colleague at PRI, Associate Director for Outreach, and I know a number of you, and I will duck back out, but I'm enjoying your contributions.
Okay. And unless one of the panelists volunteers to go next, I'll volunteer Mark, since he volunteered Katie to go first.
I knew you were going to do that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, it's working. Thanks, Katie. I have to say first, I couldn't agree with you more on basically everything you said, including going back to what we knew when we first started teaching and using those tools that really worked, kind of some of the old school things about individual accountability associated with group activities. You know, each kid had a certain thing. So, but before I talk about that a little bit, I wanted to go back to kind of the history thing. And what you said, Katie, is true. You know, all of a sudden we had to change, and we didn't have any choice. In fact, in the Ithaca School District, it was kind of on a Sunday or a Saturday, they sent out an email that said, on Wednesday, we're going to start teaching with this new platform called Canvas. And we're okay, you know, and we pretty much all learned it, you know, by ourselves in the Zoom meetings and set them up like we thought we were. And the district did provide lots of tutorials, and they tried to get everybody kind of on the same page, but it was a real mess to begin with to start. And when we were doing the Zoom meetings, or ours was Google Classroom or Google Meet, you were teaching to one or two kids in my classes where you saw them on the screen, and the rest of them were an icon. And then you had those poor, unfortunate students who fell under the mallet when you decided to end class 10 minutes early, but they were still on the screen, you know. You know, goodbye everybody, but their icon is still there. It's like, hello. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I had to go to the bathroom, and my mother called me. And it's like, you know, you guys don't need to kid us about anything. So it was a huge change in format, and in my opinion, it wasn't teaching. We did everything we could. I mean, to give you an example, you know, teaching biology by Zoom meeting is ridiculous. And you know, I went out and collected a bunch of macroinvertebrates. We do a water quality study every year, and took them all, bought a camera, put them under the camera, had students doing diagrams on their Zoom and trying to do all that stuff. And we still had a very low participation rate. As soon as the kids figured out that their friends were on their icons, we used to do this flash thing where they'd all come on once in a while, just so I could feel like I wasn't teaching to nobody. I would every so often say, guys, I feel like I'm by myself. Are you still there? And they'd all come on, and then they'd all go away slowly as it wore off. And in our classrooms before that problem, we were dealing with, or before that happened, we were dealing with some of our usual kind of school problems. You know, Ithaca High School at that time in 2019 and 2020, we're having a huge vape problem. You know, the Juul was still around, and kids were turning off so they could go into the bathrooms and vape and come back into the classroom instead of smoking cigarettes. There were, at the time, it was supposed to be this great way for you to quit smoking. As we all know, they've added to that now. And so they're turning their brains off whenever they can and having little powwows in the bathroom, and they're all sitting in there during class time. And this is before COVID was happening. We also had the cell phone issue. This is not a forum to go into that, but cell phones, that little rectangle in your pocket, has taken over the world. Why listen to Mr. Johnson when you can hit one button and, in their minds, look up what meiosis is, right? You know, why pay attention to a teacher? And other things, of course, right? The restrictions that they felt they had the right not to have put on them, and so on. And so all of those usual things that we deal with a teacher beyond curriculum were there, and then COVID hit. And they spent the best part of a year and a half being able to do basically whatever they wanted. And so all of that stuff in my mind got worse, and they weren't able to, you know, kind of follow along with the academics. So they lost a couple of years. And I think the biggest mistake that I did initially, and a lot of my colleagues made, and I ended up changing it within the first 2 weeks, but was that we thought we could go back and say, all right, yay, everybody's back. Welcome back. This is wonderful. I'm all excited. We're going to get back into it. So let's go exactly the same way that we were before COVID. And that absolutely did not work, because the kids spent 2 years on their phones, and they couldn't understand why they weren't able to be on their phones. There was a whole issue with that. And then there was the academic piece, and that's what I concentrated mostly on this past school year, and a little bit of the year before that when I went back in towards the end of the year, was how how do we fill these areas? And this was the reason that Don and I were talking about having this forum. How do we fill these gaps? I've been calling the COVID gap. These areas where you want to talk about biochemistry. There's no way in biology that you can't talk about carbon if you're talking about biochemistry. And the kids have no idea why carbon's important. And basically some of them, I can honestly say, didn't even know what carbon was and that how did it contribute. They didn't know that it was an element. You know, all of these things that we thought they had brought with them, they did not bring with them. And so I did two strategies, and I won't go into the strategies as much because I want to hear from some of the people that are coming to hear the panelists talk. But a couple of the strategies that I tried out that worked pretty well was, one, carrying something over that worked well during COVID. So I would put it on the screen, of course, and up in the front on the smartboard instead of being on your computer. But I have a hook that I usually start with. I just very cleverly call it a think question. And it's some sort of a way to give them an idea of what we're going to be talking about today, or a connection between what we did today and the day before. Sometimes it was looking something up on a website. Sometimes it was a little short video, and then there's some questions to answer. And then we take those questions and put them together. And at the end of the week, you get a quiz based on the answers that you put on those questions. And that was very effective because they could do it kind of online. Could they look the answers up? Yes. Did they look the answers up? Yes. Yay. I want them to get it as much as any way they possibly can. So sometimes for the quizzes, you know, they were handing them in, they would look the stuff up, but it didn't matter. And then the other thing I tried to do was do these little kind of side lessons by asking the students through the think question, or by just giving them a little, what we used to call pretest, to see if they had any prior knowledge to help them through the topic that we were going to cover. And carbon was a good example. And if they didn't, then we added a little activity to kind of remind them that you need to know this in order to go on a little bit further. And I have to say, it put me really behind, if that is even a real thing. It never is in my mind, but we went through stuff a lot slower, and that helped a lot also. And then I guess the third and last thing is to do a lot of these kind of conversational type academics, where you have a chat room and you post something in the chat room, and then you respond to somebody else's stuff that they put in the chat room, and you're being the assessment is based on whether they answered the question from somebody else, or if they put in their own information, or those sort of things. So everybody had a small piece, and then you get together on your side and have like a debate. So there was a lot of that kind of conversational stuff. And then I went back to a lot of group work with individual accountability. Katie, you addressed that really well. It was exactly the same sort of thing, where you have an overall project that everybody has a piece. In order to complete the overall project, everybody needs to put their piece in, but there's a component that that individual person has to do that they're going to be responsible for. And if they don't do that piece, it doesn't affect everybody else. It's an understanding that you go into the project with. So nobody says, hey, that's not fair, you know, and those sort of things. Now, did it work last year? Not completely. Was I still frustrated? Absolutely. There were many kids that were, you know, the ones that I always call are on the fence. The honors kids, you want to call them that, the higher academic level students who understand the stuff, they're going to do well despite me. It doesn't matter what I say, they're still going to do well. And then there's also the other end of the bell curve, where the students who are just not going to do well because of their history and life plan and all that kind of stuff. But it's those kids in the middle on the fence that I think we lost a lot of them during those couple of years after COVID, or a year and a half after COVID, because they were trying to decide whether they want to engage or not. And they had just, as I said, had a couple of years where they didn't have to engage if they didn't want to. Nobody was pushing them to do anything really. And so they chose the latter. They chose not to engage. And we lost a lot of the students that way, or I felt like I did. So despite those three major changes that I made, we still have a collection of kids that are, I'm sure, are going to be coming in this year For those of you who came in later, I recently retired in June, so I can't speak to what I'm going to do this year because I'm retired, but but I can speak to what I have done. And I also have to say that I have several colleagues in the high school that I'm going to be working with during the school year anyway. So my ears are wide open. I really want to feel that this is just not just the science department at Ithaca High School that had these problems. Because that's what happens, as we all know, is when you get into it and things are tough and you have the answers in your classroom because you're the teacher and you can control it. And as you gain more control back, you have a tendency to kind of turn into your department or into yourself. And I'm not going to say shut the door because I hate to do that, but you're in your room and you're dealing with your students because that's all you can do. That's all you have time for. And it'd be nice to figure out a way that we can start collaborating with other departments, because I'm sure they had the same problems that we did, if not more. I can't even imagine what it would be like to teach math on Zoom, or something like that. How do you make math exciting on Zoom? I don't know. But they did it, somehow they did it. All the kids coming back had the same discrepancies, but they made it through it. So that's where I stand. I really am interested to hear what our participating teachers have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So far we're not doing so great on 3 to 5 minutes, but that's okay. It's a pretty loose agenda, and I think I'll pass it off to Sean if that's okay. Yeah.
That's okay.
Take it away.
So the main reason I'm actually here today is because a couple of weeks back I was kind of pondering things, and I just posted something on Facebook to the effect of, I feel like COVID made me a better teacher. I tend to just kind of put my thoughts up on Facebook, and sometimes they get me in trouble like this. And the reason why I was thinking about that is I was kind of contemplating where I was before COVID and where I am today. And yeah, Don, I forgot to include that part. Don asked me to join us. Where I was in the past and where I am today. And I was thinking about how prior to COVID, I thought that I prided myself on, knowing my students and doing what I could to be flexible with them. And, at that point I had been teaching for 15 years, and I was pretty much locked into what I was doing. Come in, had a bell ringer, we had some discussion, we took some notes, had a little bit of work on some practice problems, and then sent them home to do some homework, and then repeat ad nauseum, take a test at the end of the week. And that was my system. And once COVID hit, we started doing the thing where we were distributing meals to students in the community. And I know that I teach in a very rural district. I teach in a district of a large number of low-income folks in our communities. But once I really saw what a lot of my students were going home to, I became a lot more sympathetic to the idea that if I'm sending them home with homework, there's no place to do the homework. And so, once we returned back to the classroom, I found myself trying to offer other ways for my students to show me they knew what they knew, whether that was through group projects. I really tried to be very open to students about that idea. I said that, a test is one way you can show me what you know, but there are other ways you can do it. Whether it's a presentation, it's whatever you want to do, that's going to look like that. And oddly enough, most kids still were like, I just want to take a test. But it still was that gave those students that flexibility to show me that. And then, like I said, also just when it came to homework, I find myself assigning a lot less homework, again, because I know that it wasn't helping those students that were going home to a situation where that was not conducive to doing homework in that situation. So bringing a lot more practice questions into the classroom and giving time to work on practice questions there in the classroom, while we're there together. And then I think the other thing I'm kind of thinking about is collaboration with other teachers. We were just talking about being locked in our rooms, and I found that I was very much like, this is my room, I do everything in my room, that's about it. And I know that especially during the COVID, while we were teaching during the pandemic, there was a lot of collaboration among teachers about, hey, I'm having a hard time with this, I'm having a hard time with that. Does anybody have any solutions that are working with them? And we came together as a faculty and shared a lot of those ideas and tried to help improve each other and do what we could to make COVID work. And I think a lot of those strategies that we developed during that time did carry over and are still being used in the classroom today. I can't hear Don.
Don, I think you're muted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hope you can hear me because I
Hey,
was.
Don,
Yes.
Don, do you mind, in the interest of this being a very casual setup, do you mind if I just make a real comment on what Sean said?
Sure.
Because I think he said something really great that I want to underscore. Sean, you were talking about homework and assessment, and I just want to say that our science department at Ithaca School District, after COVID, God, did we move away from that? We had meeting after meeting after meeting about why are we even giving homework, and it was for exactly the reasons you just said, exactly those reasons. And do we have to? Does a test have to be our standard sit down, multiple choice, free response, blah blah blah? Or can we just call something else a test and then they take it the same way? And we did that too. So thank you for bringing that up. That's something that is a whole other conversation about what do we do about assessment now and what do we do about homework and things like that, or are they even necessary? The whole grading concept.
Yeah, the research on homework has always been at best ambiguous on whether it's helpful or with the typical forms of homework. And I'm very glad to hear that the homework load has decreased. I would call that a positive outcome. And I'm going to hand it off to Melissa.
Before you do, Don, I just want to add that this whole thing has got me chasing down a rabbit hole, talking about standard-based grading and what that looks like and how to implement that, and trying to encourage more folks in my school district to try and move towards that as well.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff written on ungrading, I think is the name of the movement. And maybe we'll do a session on that later. Now I'm going to hand it off to Melissa.
Okay, I'm gonna time myself on my watch. So, all right. So I think it's important to know that my district is now in the majority under the poverty level, and we're an urban district. And I saw Mary Bowles on there, and I'm wondering if it's the same Mary Bowles from West. So if it is, she knows what I'm talking about. So I am in the middle school. Awesome. I'll see you in a few. So I'm at the middle school that feeds into Mary's school, which is the high school, and my own children go to that high school. So the community used to be very middle class, and it's changing. And we're now considered an urban school district, and everybody for the first time in the district gets free lunch and breakfast. And we have a very large district, one of the bigger ones in Western New York. So that is very different. I used to teach in a rural school district, and it's very interesting to think about both. And I think with the pandemic, one of the things that I think about a lot is I think it changed, or I think it brings up the question, why do we have to go to school? And I think a lot of people have different answers to that. And I think it's really interesting to think about that, because I think too, during the pandemic, we lost a lot of kids, right? We had a lot of chronic absenteeism. It's hard to engage them. But then coming back, I think our district tried to sort of take the soft and fuzzy approach, because we know a lot of our kids struggle with a lot of stuff at home. And we tried to do a lot of things also the same, and it's just not the same. So I think about this a lot, like why would my kids want to go to school? Why would they want to come, when they could learn what I'm teaching them? What am I giving them that they can't find outside of school besides lunch? I mean, we have a lot of kids who literally come to high school to eat. So like I think the hardest thing is just engaging them. I think yesterday, and Marion, you can correct me too if I'm wrong, but yesterday our superintendent said like the average before the pandemic, the average days of suspension for kids who got suspended were 8 days or something like that. And the average days last year, which was a normal year, was 55. So there's something going on. Like, so you imagine all the kids that got suspended, the average length is 55 days. So either they're not coming to school or they're coming to school, and the kids who obviously have the biggest need because they're getting suspended are being kicked back out of school. So there's a lot going on. So our school has been adopting trauma-informed care over the last several years. And now I think we made a hard pivot to really working on that this upcoming year. And I'm really wondering like what difference, or if it will make a difference in what's going on. So I think the hardest thing is the changing needs of the kids and even the community. And I think that it's challenging because we don't know what those needs are. We're still trying to figure that out. And I think when the kids were out from the pandemic, like what Mark said, they could do whatever they wanted, but they also did not have those relationships. So I think at first we thought this will be great. Lots of families will be able to spend lots of time together, but we also forget that there's lots of families that are not safe. And there's a lot of trauma coming back in, which is why I think probably we're seeing a lot of behaviors and we're seeing a lot of extreme violence. And that's very concerning because we're definitely not equipped to deal with that in our district. I do think the pandemic has made me a better teacher, for sure. I think I love technology. I love trying it. So I feel very comfortable with that. And I'm excited to do all that stuff. And the kids love it. And they can help me with it. And they love that is naturally engaging to them. So that is a good thing. I also think I thought I knew, like what Sean said, I thought I knew what relationship or what the kids were like at home because I live in the community and I had no idea. So like one of the best things that happened to me is me and my 3 children decided to deliver meals all over the community during the pandemic and then also run supplies to kids. And I made my kids come along with me because mine were in that school too at the time. And it was so eye-opening. And I live right down the street from these kids. And I could not believe the things they have to deal with at home, that being from very different sort of family is shocking, or some of the things that, I did have to deal with at home that I didn't realize until the pandemic were maybe unusual too. So that was kind of shocking to me. And I think it's made me a better teacher because I think now I realize that I can't do anything unless I have a strong relationship with the kids. So I think, in middle school, obviously that's a given. We work really closely in teams in middle school, and our priority, like it's totally different approach. Like we were just sitting down with our team and now we think about what a child's day will look like from beginning to end when they visit every single class and they see each of us. So I think that has changed it, where I'd be like, okay, this is what I'm doing in science. I don't even know what's going on in math, but like, for example, if they're sitting every period, we like as a team, our core teachers, there's 5 of us, we plan so that their day is different. So they're not sitting all day or they're engaged all day. So that is very different approach than before. And I know that's hard to do at a high school because I taught in high school for 12 years. And this is my 7th year in middle school. So I know that was hard for me to get used to coming to middle school as planning as a team, but now I can see how strong that is. So that's my 5 minutes, a little more. Nope. That's my 2 cents.
Great. And
I love your cat.
That was a sweetie. Yeah. One of the nice things about teaching in the pandemic was getting to know your students' cats.
Yes. I miss that.
Yes. Okay, so it's just time for general discussion, and I think I could ask some questions, but I think maybe I'd rather have people just ask what they'd like to ask. panelists asking other panelists for follow-up, and our 3 participants asking the panelists too. We really did have more registered than this. But use a little wait time, and then I'll ask my own question if nobody comes up with one. So one thing that I had a little bit of hope about at the beginning of the pandemic was that there was a chance for sort of reset on schools and trying to figure out how to do things differently, because the structure of schooling is not informed by what we know about how people learn, because how could it be? Because the structure of schooling is about 4,000 years old. And we didn't really have much research 4,000 years ago on how people learn, but we have the same structure of putting kids in rows and having them face the front of the room where there's information on the front wall of the room and somebody talking about that information. And I think the panelists have raised some ways that maybe they've moved away from that, but I'm wondering if there are other thoughts on if there's broader changes that maybe step us back from that 4,000-year-old model that I don't think works super well. What do you think?
One of the things that that brings to mind for me, Don, is like, I know that we're shifting our assessments, which I think is a good thing, but at the same time, keeping education meaningful. Like, what do we want them to learn? Why do they need to learn it? Our district projected it as a little bit like iffy, where they want us to offer the regions, but if the students don't want to take the regions, then they can do an alternative assessment instead that we would need to create. And so creating assessments that are different as far as their mode, but are assessing the same skills, like that's going to be like a real challenge. And I think one of the reasons we've delayed change in education so long is because everyone's just sort of like, where do we start? Or that's going to be a complicated thing to figure out. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But it's just sort of, that's what comes to mind, is sort of like, where are we heading in that, how are we going to get to that place? Because it is such a shift from that traditional education system.
And I think Mark had a thought. Nope, he double clicked, so he is not unmuted.
I have a thought on that. I was just typing it, and I'll just say it really quick so I can give other people a chance. Our district took the opportunity during the pandemic to get rid of traditional final exams for 6th and 7th grade. And we've done a portfolio for 2 years now. So we do it all in the science practices, and we develop the rubrics, with input from people that are already doing it. And we developed our own written assessments or models or whatever the science practice is. And we're adding a science practice like every year or so. And I love it. I love it so much. It's tougher to grade at first, but it's so much more fair. And it feels like it can reflect each individual kid. Now, having been a Regents and AP teacher, I don't know how you can do that yet, but I think the move towards, I don't know if everybody's district is doing this, but uncoupling the Regents exam score from the final average is a good move toward being able to do that, something like that. And we don't have a big thing at the end of the year. We just collect pieces throughout the year.
Mark, you got thoughts?
Yeah, there was an interesting balance. I went away from the kind of standard rows and teacher in the front of the room concept a long time ago. And I went to this system where we have groups of 4, and each of the groups has a number, and each of the 4 people in the group has a color. And the whole reason I did that is because it's very easy to get to a group or an individual by using Uno cards. So you just draw randomly and you can get around the room very quickly. But one of the things I noticed soon after COVID, and I think it is kind of because of a lot of the things we've been talking about, but that we're able to do and weren't able to do at home, and what the home atmosphere was like, and as opposed to here, students started setting up camp in these groups. You know, they like group number 6, which always ends up towards the back of the room, didn't make any difference whether I was teaching from the back of the room or right next to their table. They were a group and they felt like it was their right to just have conversations. And, you know, they started to set up a camp. And, you know, once you get to know the kids, and everybody's been saying this, and you kind of work out that sort of thing by being transparent with them, like, this is not going to be sustainable, guys. It kind of went away, but I just brought that up because it's a real hard line to find. You know, what is the place where you should be after all the things that happened in COVID? You don't want to be into this steadfast competitive group type of situation, and you don't want to be in the kind of standard classroom situation. So what is that middle of the road kind of feeling that students have? And one of the ways that you can do that, which of course is a lot more work for teachers, is change up the groups all the time, or assign certain kids to certain groups based on, you know, whatever it is you want to base it on. So that, you know, that works pretty well. But that was something that I had never had a problem with in the past. But after COVID, there was a different kind of vibe in the classroom as far as what they felt was appropriate while another student was speaking, or the teacher was speaking, or guest speaker, whoever it was, and what they thought was appropriate before COVID. We used to joke, we joked around in the science department, we called it, they forgot how to be a student. You know, they felt like they were kind of sitting around in their living room kind of thing. And it was just a different thing for me, having taught for so long, and then having all of a sudden this strange thing happen in my classroom where kids were just flat out refusing to pay attention. You know, they were, this is what we are supposed to do.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was working to address this year. And before we would do like the group project work for the SALT study, I'd have the students get up, get into pairs. They'd have to greet each other with like a good afternoon or a good morning. And then I would give them like, okay, this is what it's like to be an active listener. This is the kinds of things that you do when you're actively listening to someone. And when you're speaking, these are sort of the attributes that you want to use, like eye contact and speaking clearly and speaking slowly. And we'd work on different skills like that as part of like the classroom activity. And I've had to do more and more of that as time has gone on, because a lot of those like social graces and etiquette and sort of like behavioral things have been kind of lost along the way. And so teaching students how to be students again, or just how to be people and how to interact face to face, I think is something that is a big challenge now with technology. And especially with that time being remote, of being attached to devices all the time, learning to let go of the devices is big. We have a caddy in our classroom, like it's a calculator holder, but we use it for cell phones. I put mine in there too, so that they see that I'm invested in that also. And just sort of like, in this classroom, we are focused together. We're going to keep our cell phones off to the side and just focus on each other. But it's sort of an interesting skill that I didn't think I'd have to teach before.
Other questions, thoughts? I can always come up with more.
So this is Mark has talked about a COVID gap and the idea, and I should let Mark describe this further, but like, so I'll just give my brief impression of like his perception of it, about the loss of skills that he mentioned when he was talking about what he learned during COVID. And so I'm wondering about other, you know, maybe if Mark could talk more about it, but maybe also if others could discuss what sort of foundational content may have been lost that needs to be regained somehow. Like, has this been your experience that students are sort of behind in their curriculum, or that there are, and you know, if that is the case, then how do we do something about that? So Mark, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm actually going to defer. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. I'd love to hear from some other people, is that the experience that they had? There were lots of things that I started at the level that I usually started at, and then all of a sudden realized that they were all staring at me like I hit them upside the head with a brick, because they didn't understand the basic concept of what I was talking about. A quick example is that every year, because we have to do this for safety regulations, we do a classroom tour. And this past school year, I put in how do you use a microscope and all that kind of stuff as part of my beginning of the year tour of the room, where this is the fire extinguisher, and this is the blanket that you put your friends out when they burst into flame, stuff like that, all ended up kind of they demonstrated to me what skills they didn't have. And then we spent a good month just kind of working on skills. They didn't know how to use a microscope. So how do you have them do that if they don't even know how to turn it on, let alone use it? So, and the technology was there too. A lot of them were baffled by the technology. They love to be able to understand it, and they all understand it better than I do, but they'd understand it and then they could tell me. But there were other ones that were like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here. So that was another thing that we thought, oh, these guys will know what they're talking about, but a lot of them still didn't. So I'd love to hear from other people.
Last year, I was frustrated because we would do labs and students would take measurements and I would be getting these numbers, and I was just like, these numbers are not right. I don't know why to admit this, sadly. It was March when I came to realize that they had absolutely no idea how to use a ruler. They were
idea how to use what?
A ruler.
Oh.
So I went up to one kid and I said, well, so, we were taking measurements. I said, what's this number? And they're like 4.7. And it was like 4.2. Right. And I'm like, why did you say 7? And because I don't remember exactly what the student said, but it was just like, they really just did not grasp how to take measurements using a metric ruler in terms of, measuring to the nearest tenth of a centimeter. And I feel embarrassed to say this in front of all these folks, but it was just like, but that was only because prior to that, every class that ever come to me before just knew how to do it. And I just didn't even occur to me that, oh, maybe why their measurements all suck is because they don't know how to use the ruler correctly.
Yeah, and I think it's very much worth remembering that kids can catch up and do so really fast if they get motivated to catch up. And one of the things, and the idea of this forum today came up in a conversation between Rob, Mark, and I in June, I think. And part of that discussion was that people do catch up in their learning if they have the opportunity and the motivation to do so, and they're put in the context where that can happen. And an example is the week of the conversation that led to this, I listened to a podcast with a kid, an adult, who had been in a religious sect that essentially had no education whatsoever, and until she left the sect at age 18 or something like that, and went off and taught herself all kinds of things, and eventually I think she got a PhD. So that's a very important bright spot to remember, is that if given the opportunity and finding the motivation, people can make up for lost learning and do so relatively quickly. And partly that's because our instructional system isn't designed for learning. So people do get into a place where they can learn, they do catch up.
I just wanted to add, I tried to have my students take some pride in their personal accountability for for example, where kids aren't taught a skill initially and they're not coming in with anything, teaching upperclassmen and knowing our curriculum and what we do and what teachers, and in some cases I've actually taught them before because I taught freshman bio for so long, and I'm like, you went through this. I want them to start feeling good about what they know and not just ignoring it, but to really value the transfer. Yep, you did this before. Let's review it. and moving on. And now you have this skill. So you have to start remembering that you have this skill and applying it, not just expect to, start at ground zero every time, like trying to get them to have some pride in the knowledge bank that they have already and just building that in. And that's tough. And I don't mind reviewing a little bit here or there. And I have to say in AP, I have the luxury of giving a summer assignment, which I really load in chemistry because that's our first unit. So they're walking in without accountability and saying, yeah, you just reviewed this. I'm not going to teach you an ionic bond again. Giddy up. If you need some time and want to talk to me outside of class, I'm here. But I want them to feel good about what they know and then be able to apply it. And like I said, I don't mind reviewing something, but I don't want them to just drag along expecting it to be retaught to them every year. And that's something we talk a lot about in our department is let's really build on those skills every year, because lab for us is a huge backbone in our curriculum through all of our classes. And we can go back and say, look, you learned this here, let's use it again. Let's practice and let's use it again and keep, I guess, supporting that skill and building that skill through different ways of using it. I don't know. That's
Other thoughts?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And also, I believe something that we lost during those 2 years, where we had, we didn't have control of our classes because of our distance and everything during COVID. And so a lot of that reinforcement of you just being able to say to the students, hey, that's great. You remembered that from all the way back from when you were a freshman. That's pretty cool. So hold on to that, because when you become a senior and you take Mr. Johnson's marine biology class, he's not going to go over why salt water melts faster than, that Don, why that whole process it works, what that's all about, because you understand that concept already, right? Sean, I want a real quick make you feel better story. I taught for many years, my teaching was freshman biology, but I also taught marine biology to seniors and juniors. And I had a student in my marine biology class hand in an assignment, and his units for the measurements that he made were 2 meters and 4 inches. That was what he wrote down on the thing. And this was a student that I taught in biology before COVID. So they should have learned it in biology when they had me. And they did probably, but didn't retain it like was just said. So sometimes it doesn't doesn't go over. So not noticing until March is not unusual at all. I think that's a norm.
Yeah. Well, I actually don't remember if we said this was going to be 60 or 90 minutes, but I think we can kind of wrap up. And I'm glad to stick around if people want to talk some more. And maybe I'll close with a great big question to give you things to ponder going forward. And that's, if you had a magic wand to change one thing about schooling, what would you change? And maybe we can talk about that for a minute or two, and or 3 or 4 if we want.
Sounds like a career's worth of something to talk about.
Yes, indeed. So, any thoughts on that?
I would say go outside.
Yeah, it's not bad. And that's a pretty simple one. And my answer, I'll spill the beans on my answer, is have kids do things that matter to the world outside of school. Like Katie's Salt Project is a good example of that. And I'm not talking about standardized test scores, but things that actually matter to the community, and solve some kind of problem and engage students in working on some kind of problem. And we mostly don't do that in schooling, but we could. And we could do that with some fairly small changes. And Melissa's done that with her students in Pembroke, making nature trails near the school. And so there are lots of examples out there. If we could ramp that up, that'd be awesome. Any other closing thoughts?
I would say recognizing that while standards, I think it is important to have standards and for students to meet, having rigid timelines that every single student needs to meet is harmful for a lot of students. And so changing those rigid timelines, I think, is, and recognizing that it's going to take some students longer to reach those.
Yeah, I think the schedule is the keystone species in schools, and don't know if it's the right one.
On to just another thing I was just thinking about was your question earlier about what are some things that are going to change. I think that what we saw occur was a very catastrophic event in a lot of ways, and I think it's going to take us. I think it's going to take a lot longer for us to really fully understand how much things have changed. And I think we're on a path towards change, but the destination's still a long ways off in terms of how things are going.
Yeah, and I'll put in the chat there. You'll be able to find a recording of today's session on our YouTube channel, which is just our website /YouTube, and that'll get you to that. And just look for the live stream videos, and they'll be there. And I will also note that coming up, the Science in the Virtual Pub series, we are starting a little bit later and ending a little bit earlier this year. We're going from the Science in the Virtual Pub has sessions on all kinds of stuff on the second and fourth Thursday of the month from the end of September through the beginning of May. Our first session will be a panel of science education professors talking about how they're preparing future teachers to teach about climate change and energy. And that's September 28th. Rob, do you want to say a word about, for those who are local to Ithaca, about the Gurchi session next week?
Sure. John Gurchi is an artist that you may have never heard of, but you have almost surely seen his work. He reconstructs ancient hominins right now. It's his specialty. If you've seen the cover of a National Geographic with a face peering out at you from our past, it's probably John's work. He is giving a talk, and he happens to be the artist in residence at PRI, has been for a long time, and he is giving a talk about the predecessor of Lucy, that is Australopithecus afarensis, on Thursday evening, September 7th. I think it's 7 p.m. in the museum. He has spoken for us many times. He's a great speaker. And then we also have the 20th anniversary of the Museum of the Earth coming up on September 30th. That's a Saturday. And I believe it's free or pay what you want, something like that. But there'll be lots and lots of activities associated with the exhibits in the museum. And then we have Teacher Resource Day coming up on October 7th. Another Saturday event. So lots of things, those and more coming up.
Yeah, and if you want to stay abreast of these things, you can subscribe to our educator newsletter, which I thought I was copying the link and it said copy blank. So let me try that again.
I wanted to say thank you for all the input. I don't teach students, I teach teachers. I train teachers in the use of the equipment that we lend out to schools, but I also do a fair amount of TLC and counseling to teachers throughout the years in different units and so forth. So that's what I try to learn as much as I can about what's going on in classrooms, what's going on in schools, because then I can give them more constructive ideas to proceed. So I really appreciate all of you sharing your experiences, because I will keep them those close to me and will share them as appropriately with my teachers throughout the year. So thank you.
Thank you. And nice to see your pup too.
Oh, by the way, his name is Obsidian. This is my daughter's dog. She's on her way to Greece on her honeymoon with her geologist husband now. And so Obi's here with us.
Very good. Okay, and with the introduction to Obsidian, I think we'll close up the session, and thank you to all for joining us today. I enjoyed it. I wish we had a bigger crowd, but they're lost.
And
Thanks all.
people can enjoy it on YouTube in the future.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks.
Do it again.
Yes,
Thank
indeed.
you.
Bye-bye.